All right, thank you guys for joining me. Number 7, episode 7 on New Scoreboards podcast. This podcast was really just about me. At first, really just struggling with the transition from athletics to business, and I was looking for a new scoreboard. And today I'm joined by a special guest, Bryant Carpenter at the Zismer Jones Group, CFP, heavy-hitting Raymond James Financial Group, and his background was in football, all kinds of sports in high school, had a lot of success in sports, and now a lot of success in business. So, Bryant, thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to jump in. Kind of a small world how we got to know each other, and we're both from Orlando, Florida. And I was reading your background. You were pretty broad spectrum of sports in high school. A lot of success in a lot of different things: weightlifting, football, track. And then, did you end up just focusing on football and at the end of your high school career, or did you play all sports throughout until you went to college for football?
Yeah, I would say all those things were designed for me to do football. So
yeah,
football was certainly
like weightlifting didn't hurt.
Yes,
football.
I was going to be lifting weights anyway. Might as well have been on the weightlifting team. And
yeah.
So all that was for football. Track just kind of happened where I ended up just being good at throwing the discus, and so I just kept doing it because it was.
Did you play golf in high school?
I did not. Well, I played golf. I did not play on the golf team.
Yeah,
by any means.
Because it's my understanding you're a pretty good golfer these days.
I do like golf a lot.
Which helps, which is funny. Brian and I are getting to know each other, and he said, "Are you a golfer?" And I said, "I will never consider myself a golfer, but I do like golf, so I do like to play."
Yep.
So that's cool, man. So you got recruited out of high school, or how'd you end up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi at Southern Miss, man?
Yeah, so I was started getting recruited my junior year more seriously, and had a couple offers from Division I schools, and still to this day, picking Southern Miss is one of the more random things that I did. I mean, I was excited about the football program and getting out of Orlando, trying something new, and so yeah, went to Hattiesburg, had other schools, but that was the one that ended up
struck a chord.
Yeah,
no, that's cool. I've been to Hattiesburg a few times because went to UCF, played in Conference USA.
Yep.
So I think we had to be in Conference USA at a similar or the same time.
We played UCF, so we probably would have been.
So when did you graduate high school?
05.
Okay, so I was 06. So yeah, that was
we would definitely have
aligned.
Not played each other, but yes,
right.
Our schools played each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Now that's cool, and obviously you went to one of the biggest high schools in the city, in the state, in Edgewater. And obviously a lot of accolades that you rallied up to gain that scholarship and that attention going out. So then go to Southern Miss. I think you were there for like a year and a half, redshirted your freshman year.
Yep. And
then ended up transferring out. So kind of how did that come about, how you went from Orlando to Hattiesburg and then on to New York?
Yes. So, you go from high school. If you're good enough to go play in college, it's because you're one of the better players in high school.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to say it's easy, but you're one of the better players, so it is somewhat easy. And then get to college and you realize everybody's really good.
Yeah.
All these guys were the best players on their high school teams.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely an adjustment. Redshirted freshman year, and you're packing on weight. You're lifting like I'd never had before.
Yeah. You're tight end, right?
Fullback.
Fullback.
Yep.
Okay.
And so anyway, so then you also realize that your body takes a beating, especially at that position that it didn't in high school. And so was there for a year and a half, went to bowl game freshman year, sophomore year also went to a bowl game. And then the end of my sophomore season, I was kind of over living in Hattiesburg. It wasn't, my favorite spot on earth. Made some great friends who I still keep up with, but was kind of starting to think about life after football a little bit. The NFL was not going to happen for me.
Yeah.
Or if it would have been, I would have had to commit my everything to it, and it would have probably lasted for like 2 months. So
yeah,
that it just wasn't going to be in the cards for me. So started thinking about life after football, and wanted to transfer. But back then, you had to sit out a year if you were transferring.
You didn't have an NIL contract. You weren't getting paid millions of dollars.
No, I viewed my scholarship as, almost like a salary.
Yeah.
But no, transfer rules were hardcore, and and they could block certain places for you to go
in conference or
whatever. Or anything like that. So I wanted to go 1AA, so I had to sit out. And then so I looked at schools like Furman, Richmond, James Madison, Villanova, Hofstra. And so I ended up going with Hofstra, which was another one of my more random decisions.
Yeah, I was looking in preparation for the podcast. I actually was like, where is Hofstra?
What is a Hofstra? So Hofstra was actually known for having a lot of Division 1A transfers.
Okay.
So on the team, there was, back then, I mean, it was probably 25 guys who had transferred in from Division 1 schools.
Wow, okay.
And so I remember our quarterback was a Wisconsin transfer. And he was like, after a game one time, he's like, I'm tired of people asking, what's a Hofstra? Which, is pretty funny. So
yeah, that's good. So it's funny, like in doing this a few times, and I had the same experience where, what is that moment? That's actually one of the questions I like to hear, is that I had that moment early on, right? Just like you said, everyone, I think, that goes to a different level of anything kind of has that like, oh, I thought I was really good. And maybe I got something, but I'm not as good as I thought I was. Everyone else is pretty good. So I remember first pickup game my freshman year, I'm like, okay, I got to go to class. Probably should build a net. Like, I knew that this wasn't going to be, a thing. Like, maybe play overseas, but the NBA, it's not in the cards. So that's cool to hear. Like, after a year and a half, it's like, okay, I can kind of see that I'm not willing or able or whatever, right? The dedication level. I just know that fire to do that and do what it takes is just, I'm not willing to do that.
Yep.
It's another route for me. So outside of the transfer to Hofstra for the Division I transfer, pretty good academic school. I mean, all the schools that you mentioned were pretty, the Villanovas and the James Madisons and the Furmans. Did that kind of look at like, okay, I want to get to a place where, I can finish and
yeah, academics definitely became more of a priority. And, Edgewater, I would say the academic institution that it is, maybe there's some sharpening that can happen there. But Southern Miss wasn't much different than Edgewater.
Sure.
And so I definitely wanted to have more of a academic background and degree just from the place I was graduating from. So.
Yeah. So fast forward, you jump into the world of finance. First job, man. What was first job, first opportunity? How did it come about? I mean, obviously, when you're playing football, you're heavy into it. Full-time job. You treat it accordingly. There's a lot going. But if you had the vision of like, hey, this isn't going to be forever, did you start to peak up and say, hey, how do I find out what I want to do in this world that's not football, that's not sports? So how did that influence come about to where you ended up, getting your first gig?
Yeah, so my first job was actually, I worked on a safari in Mozambique.
Wow.
Right after college. And so I did that for, it was probably 6 to 8 months, I guess, and then realized that, because I had always just loved, outdoors, wildlife, and realized after, 6 to 8 months of being there that was not going to be my long-term
What did you
profession.
do on the safari? Like,
I was basically helping, I was kind of an assistant guide, helping,
So you're on the vehicle?
Oh, yeah.
So you're doing the
whole deal.
Yeah, and I've been in those vehicles. They can get a little dicey.
It can get dicey.
Yeah.
And, and when clients weren't there, I was helping build roads or just doing manual labor type stuff. And the guy basically said, a friend of mine set it up for me and just said, we're not going to pay you, but you can have an experience. We'll pay for your expenses, which at 23, I was like, all right, I'm in.
Single,
do whatever.
never going to get this opportunity again.
That's
type.
right.
Wow, that I forget that part of your story.
Yeah.
And I remember you sharing that, but just the context of that's your first thing out of college. Did your parents think you were crazy, or did they support
Definitely.
you?
They were very nervous. They thought I was crazy. And I did go with a buddy who I'm still really close with, just because that kind of experience. It's hard not to be close to the guy. But then I came back, and that was when I was just having a conversation with somebody, literally at a Christmas party, and asked what I was doing, told them what I had just finished doing, and they said, well, you should come, his name's Bob Bourne, you should come work at CNL, which I didn't know what CNL did at that time, but I wanted a job, so I was open to it, and went in and interviewed with him, and he basically said, well, we'll teach you the business, but the other part we can't teach you, and that part we like.
So how did you meet Bob? Who was the connector? Do you remember? Was it a friend of a friend? Was it just curious at the
just
network?
Longtime friends of my parents, and then we went to a Christmas party and just kind of
hit it off.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool. What do you think he saw in you? What do you think he saw when you say the things that we can't teach you? What do you think he meant by that, and how do you perceive that now that in hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, I think he obviously thought the Africa thing was interesting, and so I think he probably thought I was interesting. But I think that the getting a little bit more of my background and in the interview process was, like it was a sales job, so they wanted to know, are you competitive? I said, well, I am competitive. What have you done that shows you're competitive? It's like, well, I played college football.
Slow hanging fruit.
Yeah. So anyways, drive, competitiveness. I think there's a gear you have when you've played a college sport, any sport, but particularly in college, there's a gear that when your coach is pushing you to run one more sprint or do one more lift or whatever the thing is, I would go there. And I feel like that has absolutely transitioned into business because there's just another gear that you have of not giving up, not quitting, that, I don't know if I would have had that gear had I not been pushed.
Man, that's so true. I mean, that gear actually gave me chills listening to it because just that, I don't know. You mentioned the running the sprints, right? And you're like, there's no way. But then you find a way, right? And then you reflect and you're like, oh, that was there.
Yep.
Like, wow, and then you start to build some confidence from it because for me, started to identify, it's like, hey, I got that gear, when I, maybe not all the time, but most times. And that's a cool thing. I never thought about that. How it directly relates to kind of the professional world.
Yeah, I mean, I remember 2 days. So you show up, freshman year, summer before, have to do summer workouts, which are hard because they're basically getting you in shape to start camp.
Yeah.
Right? And there's not many places that are hotter than Orlando, Florida in August.
No.
But Hattiesburg, Mississippi is one of them.
Didn't think about that.
So hot. And so we're starting 2 days. And you're realizing, man, I'm playing now with guys who are 4 years older than me. It's hot as can be. You're practicing multiple times a day. The coaches are relentless. It's a new intensity that I had not experienced in high school. In high school, you're one of the better players. It's coach isn't yelling at you too much.
Get used to the pace. You get used to what's expected.
That's right.
It becomes comfortable, it seems. And then now you're in this uncomfort zone of like, wow, I'm getting kicked in the mouth every single afternoon. Every
afternoon. And those were long days where you're like, I just don't know if I can do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
how much longer can I do
How can I
this?
hurt myself? I remember I had my suite mate had an appendicitis. And we were all saying like, yeah, that's the best injury you could possibly have because he's not actually hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, he's hurt temporarily.
Yeah.
And he gets to miss.
It's not an ACL.
It's not an ACL.
Yeah.
Like, no one wants to tear their ACL, but he had to miss 3 weeks of camp anyway. So, yeah, but that was I don't know how to describe it other than a gear. That is,
like in the fire, you kind of learn something about yourself. Yeah, I had a friend similar. He had like a fluke calf injury. And I'm like, bro, it's a very convenient calf injury.
Yeah, that's
like,
right.
How much are you paying the trainer to be out right now?
Right.
That's funny. So you get the job with Bob. What were early days? First role, sales what? What were you selling? Who were you talking to? Who were the prospects?
So I was selling a private credit fund with KKR. So KKR is a big private equity firm, and I was assisting in raising capital for the outside salesperson. So I was kind of his support person. So answer investment questions, set meetings for him. Really tee him up to be successful. And so selling private real estate funds and then private equity funds. And that job was not a fun job because you're basically cold calling.
Hammering phone calls.
And I remember one time I called a guy and he's asking me kind of some layup questions.
Yeah.
Or what ended up being layup questions. They weren't layup questions to me when he was asking me. And so after about 4 or 5, my thing was I was always going to say, if I don't know the answer to something, I don't know.
Right.
I'm never going to make anything up. Just say I don't know. And so after about 4 to 5 I don't knows, he says, why don't you learn your effing product
Oh, wow.
and call me back? So I was totally embarrassed, humiliated. And so I said, all right, I'm going to be an expert at this thing. And so that particular product, which was kind of our most popular thing at the time, I went and spent all this time with our fund managers, all the analysts, and I truly knew it front and back better than anybody else at CNL. And I think that was what made me effective at then becoming an outside salesperson. So I got promoted after probably a year and a half of being on the inside sales role. So I moved to Nashville and then started doing the outside sales job.
Yeah, I kind of feel a little bit of that gear, though, right there, right? Like you're challenged, and you can either say, I hate this job, it's not for me. Let me go look to find something else. Or you went, you know what? No, I'm going to go learn this product better than everyone. And then it leads to the promotion, so outside sales, did you do that for a while, or what came next after the outside sales? And
yeah, so I did that for almost 10 years.
Yeah, that's why I was looking at prep for this, and you were in that role for quite a bit.
Yeah, so I was in that role for a while. I did it in Nashville. So I basically drove all over Tennessee and Kentucky, meeting with financial advisors, training them on how our products worked, seeing if they could be a good fit for their clients. And so, I probably met with 1,000 different financial advisors over that time period. And then later on, ended up leaving CNL. My wife and I went on a kind of an adventure for a year, came back, we got pregnant with our first son, and then actually rehired back at CNL, and that took us to D.C. So we lived in Annapolis, Maryland for a few years and did the same job, just in a different market up there.
So still going around seeing financial advisors,
Yep.
just in a different market.
Yep.
That's so interesting that now you fast forward, and how was the opportunity introduced as far as what you're doing now and from there? And I just think it's kind of ironic that your customers that you were calling on for 10 years
Yep.
to have such a broad experience of, hey, what does this advisor go through? What do they deal with? Hey, what do the really good ones do? What do the really bad ones do? That's a lot of reps. And then all of a sudden you're in a spot where you have an opportunity to kind of inch into that business. And now, take me to what you're doing now.
Yeah. No, I saw it all. I mean, you saw what the great ones did and what the bad ones did, just like every industry has. And I would say it wasn't until I was doing that job in D.C. that I started having the idea of like, all right, I actually like that position more than what I think I'm doing now. And so that's when it started churning for me, just the thought of that. And so I called Mike Zismer, who is a longtime family friend, and did it really well. And so I just was like, hey, can I pick your brain on what this would look like? How would you coach someone in my position to make the transition? And so I actually had, so after a lot of phone calls, probably a year of thinking about it, praying about it with my wife, we were choosing between Nashville and Orlando. The advice we got was pick where you want to be first, and then figure out who you want to work with.
Good advice,
and
yeah.
so we ended up choosing Orlando, and Mike just said, hey, if you're going to do this, join us and do it with us. Yeah. And so, I kind of said, hey, who can I learn from that I think does it as good as anybody? And so that's kind of what I've been doing for the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's cool. I also think that type of conversation, it seems like you had a really good approach to that, where I almost think like even if you're coming out of school or you're in something that you don't like and you're looking at an industry that maybe you are attracted to, I think people can struggle with that conversation. Like, well, do I ask them for a job or how to? So it seems like your approach was more like, hey, talk to me about what you think. Let me pick your brain as like a whole, as this is an industry I'm interested in. Like, what do your days look like? What all the stuff that like that. And then it seemed like it backed into a fit with, hey, well, if you're going to do it, you might as well do it with us. Would you have any advice to somebody that's having those conversations with like a mentor or somebody they're interested in a gig with on how you kind of approach that and how you had
Yeah,
success?
I mean, I think I was genuine when I was wanting advice.
Yeah.
Right. So I think people can see through if you're really just trying to get a job, then just say you want a job. I think just being honest is always works the best. And so I was genuine, and I just wanted his advice.
You're
and
curious.
I was genuinely curious. And so it turned into that. I think seeking advice from older people that you respect, when I look at now, when someone's coming out of college, I'm an old guy that they're looking at, right?
We are now old.
We are old, which is sad, but there are people who are older than me that I'm looking to and saying, all right, what about that guy's life do I want and want to try to repeat for myself? And so, absolutely, I think going to mentors and finding people who will invest in you is huge.
Did you look at the whole of what the life looks like? Did you look at the money? You looked at the lifestyle? You looked at did you look at the balance of it all? I'm just curious because I think that's also a mistake I made out of school. It's like, well, I'm going to get the job that's making the most money, right? And then, again, a little bit more experience and a little bit better advice from some more experienced older people. Like, well, look at how the days are spent. Look at, is that something you could see yourself doing? And specifically, don't look at the early days, like what it's going to take to get there, right? Because that's a different question to me. It's like, look at what success looks like. And does that look pretty good to you? If the answer is yes, then the better question is like, okay, well, what would it take to get there? And maybe with a guy like, Mike, where you're like, hey, what would it take to get there? Because I really like how this looks.
Yep.
What would it take to get here? So how many years in on that journey and kind of what are you enjoying about it?
Yeah, so I was listening to something recently. There's a podcast I was listening to that was talking about the 7 days of creation. And the seventh day, God rested. And the point that this guy was making was God knew when to say enough. He knew when to be done and rest. And I think the difference with us most of the time is that we don't know when to say enough. And so I have friends who have made tons of money, but they have not known when to say enough, and it burns them in the other areas of their life that they say it is important to them. So, like for me, I really want to have a good marriage. I want to be a good dad. I want to be able to go to my kids' sports games and all that type of stuff. And so looking at it, like you can choose to make X amount of money, but at what cost are you making that money for, right? And so there's a fine line of where do you get to that works for your family, and then what is more another zero or more for you or selfish or whatever. So I don't know, something you said made me think of that. But now, so I'm 2 years into it, into this transition, and it's a very slow building business, right? So if you're going to do it the right way, it takes time. Because a lot of advisors will charge transactional fees to kind of get them going in the beginning, which we're not doing, and so it's just much of a slow build. So it's gone great. I have high expectations for myself and want it to happen overnight, and so I have to constantly remind myself, like, it's okay.
Sure.
But that gear comes in where I wanted it yesterday.
That's great. And by the way, what you said about the 7 days of creation and how people design their life essentially, and then something I caught, what people say that's important. I think that is something that's interesting, is like you say family is important, but are you aligning your life? And I mean really long term. I mean, in the short term, everyone's going to go through seasons where you're maybe redlining it and you're giving it all you have, and maybe you don't rest on the seventh day in some seasons. But if you get to a point where you're consistently not resting on the seventh day, you're consistently missing stuff that you value, you're consistently, not in a healthy relationship because it's not a priority and you're not spending time together, I think that's where the real challenge comes from. Or you're not progressing to a place that you could get there. Like maybe you're not there immediately, but man, are you designing in a way that you will end up being? I just think that's so wise. So wherever you got that advice, counselor, just life experience to kind of say, hey, let me point where I want to live first, and then I'll figure out where I'm going to work and what I want to do, and then let me figure out what kind of life I want, And then I'll figure out if my profession fits that and supports it. And I would guess and assume, just we know each other a little bit, it's like, I'm sure you love making money. I'm sure it's not like, I'm sure you're not like, hey, family's so important that I want to be at this income for the rest of my life.
Right.
But you're just saying this is so important that everything else has to fit around it. And I don't think one takes away from the other, but I'm not going to take away from here. If I can make more money, great. I know I will because I'm good and I'm going to build this.
Yep.
That's what I hear, at least.
No, I mean, that's how I think about it. So it's those, if I'm saying those things are important to me, then I should put those in the order of the right importance. And so to me, it was, all right, what do I want to do that allows me to do these things? And then finding something, which I was confident that I would and have, and finding something that actually brings me a lot of purpose and a lot of joy in what I'm doing. And so, meeting with families and walking into their financial situations and the problems that are there, trying to find solutions, working through relational dynamics. You'd be amazed how many conversations I'm a counselor in a lot of ways. So you're doing the money part of it, but then there's so much, it's so much bigger. There's a lot of behavior with it. Everyone's background on money is different. So that's usually one of the first questions we like to kind of figure out with people is, what was your upbringing like? How do you define money? What's your language around money? Because if you're speaking a language or I don't really understand where you come from, or you're going to speak a different language, then I'll miss on some of the things that you're trying to tell us. Yeah, what a wise approach, right? It's like you got to figure out where somebody is so you can collectively go somewhere else rather than just saying, hey, you need to get here, you're way over here, and we're just not connecting. Sure. I don't know why. Sure. Yeah, that's cool. And I also relate to the long build, right? Like our business is no different in the property and casualty insurance space. That's where I started. And I was 23, and that was a whole level of, I'd do it different, kind of thing. But now you're on the other side of it. You had a lot of life experience, and then now here you are, mid-30s. Yep, 36. Yeah, just coming into really some of the prime years of career where you're not super young, where you're like me, where you're out of college and you're trying to sell insurance, but you're still on your parents' auto policy. It's like they're paying your cell phone bill still. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're like, you don't have a lot of life experience to be able to relate. I look at your age and your life and the story. One, it's so interesting, right? The Africa stuff is so interesting. And I think sometimes people can miss that too. There's something to being interesting, whether it's your uniqueness about different stuff. It doesn't have to be travel, but it could be travel. It doesn't have to be golf, but it could be golf, to where somebody's drawn to your life experience and it's interesting. So I think that's cool about your experience, but I also just think like you're in such a sweet spot to be able to just hunker in and build something long term. And I think that frustration of it taking a long time, God, I relate. Yeah. I relate so much. And I think that's also something to speak to, is like, to have all the things that you just mentioned that you want to have, right? You want to have, a great relationship. You want to have a really strong family. You don't want to miss games. You want to grow your income and your business and all this stuff. That takes a lot, right? That takes a lot of patience. That takes a lot of activity. And so there's like no shortcut of when you do it or how you do it. It's just, there's no shortcut, right? Yep. So I think you're wise to just hunker down but it is that frustration. Like, yeah, I know, but I'm competitive. Right. Oh, yeah. And people are telling me to be patient, but I don't want to be patient. That's right. Yeah. And their level of patience is different than mine. And no, I think one of the things that has been helpful is, I think I'm probably just a genuinely curious, interested person in other things. And so, and I had some wins and life experiences that helped exaggerate that. So like me going to Southern Miss felt like a huge risk at the time. Like I grew up in Orlando, always lived in Orlando. Right. All my family, like every single person in my family went to Florida. My dad played football at Florida. Yeah. My brother played football at Florida. My mom was a cheerleader at Florida. Both sisters went to Florida. So going to Southern Miss was totally out there. Yeah. Felt like I was going to New World. And then going to Hofstra, being, basically in Queens. Yep. I mean, that was New World. So then go to Africa. So there was enough things, but I was through those experiences, I mean, the Hofstra experience particularly, realized like, oh, I can do this. And so now I actually then built a confidence of, I remember when I got promoted, one of my best friends promoted me at CNL from the inside sales job to the outside sales job. And I remember driving up with everything I had in my car, because I was single and everything fit in my car, and thinking like, man, I cannot believe they've given me this. They've given me this job.
Done. Yeah.
Yeah. Sooner or later, they're going to find out I'm an idiot.
Right.
That, they're going to fire me. And then had a ton of success. And so just all those little things built confidence, but they all felt like risks. And, so they weren't, it's easy to sit back now and think like, oh yeah, that all went great. It's like, well, actually I remember driving up to Nashville and being terrified, but facing it. And so I think that was all those little moments are big.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that, sometimes in this world, you look at somebody's Instagram, you're like, wow, you went from Hattiesburg to New York to Africa to everything's good. Like you miss that little feeling of like, oh no, like what am I going to be able to do this? Yep. And then to do it, that almost feels like that's a muscle. And a little bit of the leveling up in athletics, I know for me is like, when you go from being the best player on the team to the worst player on the team, and you whatever it may be, and you're constantly, but then you level up and you're like, oh, that's what that feels like. That oh shit moment goes, oh, I'm good enough. I did that. Okay, right. So this next feeling that I get in the parking lot when they gave me this promotion and they shouldn't have, you're like, okay, but I'm going to keep going. And then you build the confidence, and it just seems like it's a muscle that gets stronger. And here you are building a business 2 years in. And there's probably, early days you're like, oh no, but then it's like, hey, we're going to keep going. And then eventually you're going to grow this amazing business. And that's a fun story to tell, because I think people feel that, but then sometimes they don't realize that other people feel that.
Yep.
And then getting through that is where the confidence seems to come from.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you look at, I don't have Instagram, mostly for that reason. And, you just don't. No one's Instagram life is as good as what they're showing it. No. It's not reality. And so
sometimes it's the opposite too. The better their Instagram life looks, the worse their real life looks.
That's right.
Not always, but it's certainly is common.
Yeah, but it's not relatable, So when if you say, hey, yeah, I remember in the early days of building my business, it's brutal. It's hard. You're just every day you're trying to find ways to grow, and but no one wants to be vulnerable and share that part of it. So that's what actually connects you is
the vulnerability.
Yeah.
And the relatability. Because if you had it all figured out and you were 2 years in and you built this massive business and it wasn't that hard for you, I'd be like, man, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Because Bryant was able to do it, and I'm sitting over here scared to death to make that next call. Yep. I'm scared to death to go in this appointment and walk in this office that I know what's going to happen, and I don't know what to say, and all these little moments that happen on a daily basis where we kind of get in our own way and start negotiating with ourselves. So I borrow a lot from that. What would you say, if you're talking to somebody who is in that transition, maybe they're in sports and transitioning out, right? Maybe they're in a job, and they know it's not forever for them. But looking back on the experience, and part of where this podcast came from, like I miss the objectivity of sport, right? Like the competition at the end of the practice, at the end of the drill, at the end of the game, I know whether I won or I lost. And it was immediate feedback.
Yep.
And when I got into building this business, it was like, I don't know, I think I'm doing the right things. Like it was less objective, and I wanted to create like a more objective scoreboard for myself. So I guess that's a long way to ask, is there any advice you'd give, your former self or somebody that's going through that to kind of help with that lack of objectivity that sports provides, but maybe building a business doesn't provide unless you create it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. One, there are metrics that your business has, most businesses do, that you can grade yourself on, right? Whether it's activity metrics, like right now we're doing a 3-month sprint, me and my business partners too. increase activity for the next 3 months. We're going to sprint hard.
90-day run, yeah.
Yep. And so we're in the midst of that right now. So there are things that you can objectively do. But the other thing I would say that has been super helpful for me, and it does really impact my business life because it impacts my whole life, is that there's a couple guys I meet with every Tuesday. So Tuesday evenings, everybody gets their little kids down, and we meet at one of our houses. We just rotate based on what's going on. And so there's 3 of us, and we meet, usually it's from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock on Tuesdays. Time, as you know, little kids is very precious. So, that's like the only time we can do it.
Yeah.
But that has been incredibly helpful in just bouncing things off of other guys. I would say the focus of that time is, the spiritual lives of each other. But also that entwines with the business life of each other. And so we're constantly asking each other questions, trying to sharpen each other. And so that's been a huge gift for me, just in being able to have a place that is safe, that you can kind of let yourself be known and seek advice from, brothers that you trust.
Yeah, like-minded people care about you.
Yep.
Who, have the same vision for their life, or an aligned vision for their life. And part of, you've mentioned this a few times, getting to know you a little bit. I know your faith is super important to you.
Yep.
And that's at the center of kind of how you've chosen to design your life, right? And and that clearly, does faith factor in on I just look at the core foundation of whatever you believe, but just even the concept of faith that, hey, tomorrow might be better than today. Like, there's a faith in that there's a plan for my life, or there's a plan. I just randomly hit me just having this conversation with you, that's something that's very important for you, and it's been something you do make a priority, and I've seen that.
Yeah, it's huge. It's the most important thing. So, and it doesn't have to look religious or cheesy or whatever. Most of it is just caring for people, and maybe someone that's hard to care for or hard to love, choosing to love that person and care for that person. And so that's been a huge part of my work life in doing that, because we're all humans. We all make mistakes. We all do certain things that might rub someone the wrong way. Like, if you and I worked, in the same office for a year, like, I promise I'm going to do stuff that bothers you, and you're going to do stuff that bothers me. But how do we, continue to try to care for each other and work through those things? So it's amazing how many unreconciled or certain behaviors that go on that I don't know how you operate, or there's just a lot of wedges that are created, I guess, if you don't.
A lot of fractures that happen over time.
Yep.
By not kind of leaning in and addressing the human experience in the way that it actually happens.
That's right.
But I think also, you look internal first, and there's this acknowledgement that, like, gosh, I'm so imperfect, and that other person, the stuff that they're doing that's bothering me, like, oh, they're probably dealing with something that I don't know about.
That's right.
And what I hear from you too is just like, you have also just a care for other people, and that's huge in what you do. I think it's huge in the world, but it's like all these other things that we talk about and what you learn from athletics and stuff like that. I think that part of it, maybe even underrated, is like, especially in team sports and in a locker room, like, there's a camaraderie there. There's a brotherhood. There's a care for other people, and knowing, it sounds like you found a little bit of that in your men's group, or not to put a label on it, but the guys that you kick it with, and you care about each other, and you want to see each other win, and all that different stuff, which is so vital to, I think, any success, is having that group.
Yeah, well, when you think about, or I'll ask you the question, but when you think about your times playing basketball, like, for me, I think of the guys I did it with.
Yeah, 100%.
Right, like, I don't necessarily remember the games. I mean, there's maybe a few that I remember.
Maybe a few, highlight reel.
That's right. But mostly I remember the guys I did it with.
Yeah.
And it's the bond that you created. And so I think the same thing is going to end up being true for our work life.
So true.
And so we're going to look back in 20 years, 30 years, and have successful businesses. But to me, it's going to be, who did you do it with?
Yeah.
And that's what you'll actually look back on and care about, whether it's your clients or your coworkers, whatever it is. That's going to be really fun. You know, the business part of it is a necessary part.
Right.
But you're going to look back doing this with your brother and your buddies, and that's what's going to be really sweet.
It's crazy that even now, I mean, we're 12 years in and still figuring out more that we, don't know than do, but it's amazing. Some of the best memories are the worst times, the hardest times.
Yeah.
And they start to become sources of pride to say, hey, remember how hard it was and all that fun stuff, because there's a shared experience there that, hey, we experienced this together and we made it to the other side. And now we're able to sit out and have a cocktail and talk about the old days. And think about, there was a quote, I think Brett posted on his Instagram, my brother, he said something like, some people are so poor, all they have is money. And it was just like, can you imagine getting to the end of the rainbow and you're a successful businessman? We have no one to share it with.
You're lonely.
You call your friend, but he doesn't answer, right? Like you're reflecting and you're, I don't know. I get goosebumps talking about it because like that is so wise. And I've never put that together. So man, that's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I had an old Southern Miss teammate call me literally 2 days ago, and who's also a client. So we were talking about some, just catching up and business stuff. And he goes, man, how glad are you that we're not doing winter workouts right now? I'm like, so glad. I'm so glad we're not doing that. But that's what we look back on and laugh out of those. Our, winter workouts were horrible. And, that's the stuff you think about.
That's cool, man. Well, thank you for being here and sharing, the vulnerability, the successes, the losses, everything in the transition. I know somebody will be better for listening. I appreciate the time. Big time, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right, brother.